Hi guys, it's Sophia from ATAR Notes, and today I'm going to take you guys through our HSC Business Studies July lecture. Before we get started, just so you guys know a little bit about me, I'm not sure if any of you have been to any of my online lectures before, or if you've seen me on the ATAR Notes TikTok, because I started running that recently. But my name is Sophia. I graduated in 2021 with a 96.3 ATAR. These are some of my marks, but the only one that really matters for this lecture is my 95 in business. And at the moment, I'm studying a Bachelor of Secondary Education at the University of Sydney to become an English and Business Studies high school teacher. So at this point, I did business studies, I tutor and I lecture business studies, and now I'm becoming a business studies teacher and I learn business studies at uni, and I'm redoing the content that I did in year 12 so that I can teach it soon. So at this point, you can just say that my life is business studies, which is why I think you guys can trust me on this one. In this lecture today, we're specifically going through HR. I know that everyone's up to different points. So whether you've finished it, this will be revision, or if you're just starting it off, this is going to be a pretty good intro to it. I wish that we could go through the entire thing in 2 hours, but we would have to absolutely fly. So for the sake of this lecture, we're going to go through the most challenging parts of HR, and just some more of like the learn tos and what comes up. But we're going to go through role, influences, processes, and strategies, and also talk about business studies tips. But because it is early and we're starting off, I thought I'd start off with the tips. Just a couple housekeeping stuff, just so you guys know. These slides and this video is recorded, so you guys can come back to them and access it all the way up until your business studies HSC exam. So if you have to leave halfway through, if it starts to get a little bit dull and you're low-key bored, I'm not offended, especially in HR. And honestly, in all of business, it's not even just HR. Business is a lot, and like listening to me talk for 2 hours. I'm gonna take no offense if you have to go, so it's all good. You can come back to it and come back to certain parts. The recording will still be on this same website, the same link. But we've also got a resource button on the screen. I don't know where to point, but it's somewhere. And you can download the exact slides that I have here. So it's not that you have to write down any notes if you don't want to. It's completely up to you if you like. But if you just want to watch and kind of treat it like a kind of like uni lecture, like just watching, if you want to type out notes, if you want to take screenshots, completely up to you, but that's just there for you. And I am going to be live on the chat as this is streamed, as like when it goes live at its scheduled time. So if you guys have any questions as I'm going, or you want to have a bit of a chat about business studies, or even just about year 12 HSC in general, we'll have a talk. We'll have a little chat in the live chat. So hopefully we're talking now. Otherwise, it's going to be a little bit awkward that I'm giving this whole intro to it. But let's get started. I wanted to specifically start on some study tips, and kind of start on that before we jump into HR, because I feel like, especially if everyone's at different points with HR, whether they've studied it or not, a lot of schools do leave it last and then don't really finish all of it before trials. It really just depends how, like, the pace that your school's moved at. So I wanted to start with surviving business studies and just some of my tips, and what I think helped me get a 95 in business, just because that's going to apply to everyone no matter what level you're at. Number one, and I put this first, and I'm so sorry because if you do follow the TikTok, I like shove this down everyone's throat. But in business studies, the syllabus is everything. Memorizing your syllabus will help you across every section of the exam. And before you go into that exam, you should know it off by heart. Now, I know it's like, oh, but there's like all those pages and all those points, but I promise you it will guide you in every section. For the short answer section and your multiple choice, they're going to take questions straight from the syllabus. Sometimes multiple choice questions will literally be the actual dashes of the syllabus dot point, and if you just had memorized it, you'll get the mark. That's come up year and year over and over again. But also in the short answer section, will let you know what influence to talk about, what dash, what process, what strategy to write about. And then same for the business report and the case study essay. It's just really going to help guide your structure, which is where a lot of students are losing marks. So across the entire subject, the syllabus is going to help so much. I don't want to, like, I feel like I'm going to say that like a million times throughout this lecture, so I am apologizing in advance, but it really is a game changer. and your notes should be structured by the syllabus. I've actually got some syllabus fill-ins that you guys can use that can help you with memorizing. Acronyms are also so great. Everyone talks about them, but they're going to help you memorize those dot points, because especially in short answer, when they can specify, and they can do it in the essay and the business report, but it's just not as common. They have done it, but in the short answer, they will specify a specific influence, a specific process, and knowing those dashes, or a specific pricing policy, and knowing those dash points is just so important. Once you finish your notes, I really recommend having a summary or a shortened version of them. Now, if you're not bothered making your own, I'm currently in the process of posting all of mine online on the TikTok. So not to plug that, but like low-key, if you wanted my notes, they're up there. I've got my summary shortened version. So far I've posted marketing, which I could fit into 5 pages, the entire 25% like of the course, like all of marketing in 5 pages. And then finance, I wish I could have done it in 5 pages, but finance is a nightmare, and I'm a finance hater, and it took me, I think, 8 pages. But those were my summaries that I was using. Unfortunately, for some reason, I was like, you know what, I'm gonna handwrite my notes. Don't know, I got into the phase, was like, oh, I read too much online about handwriting and how that helps your memorization, and I hand wrote all these summaries. So I haven't posted my operations in HR if you are watching this live, but maybe by the time if you're watching the recording, I'm gonna try and get them out in the next week, so that my entire business studies summaries are online, and that you can save them straight off TikTok if you like. But again, not necessary if you want to make your own. But once you have finished your notes, I think a shortened version is so important, and just having them as simplistic as possible, because you don't want to go into your HSC exam with like 30 pages on HR, 40 pages on finance, 30 pages on marketing, and like flipping through and be like, yep, I know this. Like going through all this, I feel like a summary is so much more important. Personally, for me, before I went into my trials and before I went into my HSC, the last thing I looked at, like before, get like when you have to pack away your stuff, was the syllabus. I was going through that, and I was using that as a checkpoint. Like, yep, I know this point. Yep, I know this point. And when I didn't know a point, I went back to my summary. And if I read the summary and it still wasn't ringing bells, then I went back to my final, like my big notes. So up to you if you want to follow this step, but I just think with the amount of content in the exam, you're doing yourself justice. You're doing yourself justice here. Now, for terminology, ratios, and case studies, flashcards really worked for me. Again, it's all up to the person, but flashcards really helped just getting down some like the main points and the main ratios as well. But like, we're talking HR today, I cannot talk finance. I've already told you guys I'm a finance hater. We're hopefully having a live chat where we can talk about which functions we like. And I know some people like finance, and I respect you so much for that. I respect it so much if you do, but personally, just not me. Could not be me. Notes, past papers, and practice questions are the best study combo. So I think stopping at notes is what a lot of students make the mistake of in business studies, because you can know all the content like inside out, but if you have not practiced applying it, especially with those questions, there are questions, don't get me wrong, in the exam where it's purely memorizing and you just need to know the content for it. But there's other questions, and especially when they give you like that, those case examples, even the short examples where it's like, oh, this business owner has this, like which strategy, that's where you really do have to know how to apply it. And I think that's why past papers are just going to give you that great exposure. Reading exemplar business reports, case essays, and sample answers is also so key. I think it helps so much just to kind of set the standard and what you're aiming for. Of course, these are all online, but especially for sample answers, NESA releases the marking guidelines. So when you search up like HSC Business Studies 2022, everyone is always going to click the first file, which is like the actual paper, but right below that there'll be marking guidelines, which has the answers, and they'll have sample answers in there as well, which you can kind of use as like a guide, but also kind of like how to mark your um your practice papers. For the business report, please just write a plan. Like, I hate that because my teacher always told me that. And also in English teachers are always like, yeah, right, do a plan out. Like, no, we have to write 2 essays and a creative in 2 hours. I don't have time to sit there and highlight the keyword. But in business studies, I don't care. All of you guys will have time to highlight the keywords. And it's so important to just, in this case, and when we're looking at this question, when it says propose human resource strategies, to just draw some lines and say which HR strategies you're going to talk about, just because it helps your structure so much. And then your executive summary, you're not trying to figure out what you're going to write about as you're writing it. You already know, and you already know the structure of your paragraphs because it's based off your syllabus points. So in this case, for the describe the consumer laws, you'd bring up the consumer laws. for marketing, and then for the strategies, you'd have the HR strategies, and you'd pick which ones you want to write about. But I promise you, it just makes your structure so much easier. Even going in and in your reading time, look at it and think, okay, what am I going to write about? And then just have that plan, because writing it on the spot and writing executive summary on the spot is just not really the vibe. Now, I don't think I have much other advice for business. I did present a business studies in-person lecture today, but it was all the content and the exact same slides that we're using today. And I think one of the most common questions that was coming up was, how many case studies should I be doing? I feel like it's hard because every school is going to tell you different things. Personally, I think having 2 to 3 businesses is a good idea. Don't get me wrong, you can just go in and, let's say your school did Qantas and every single case study is Qantas. 100% you can do that and still get full marks. But I think it's actually easier for you if you kind of mix up your case studies. I know for me, I did Qantas and Macca's specifically. And I really recommend Macca's. If you aren't writing about Macca's, I really recommend it. A common theme that we're going to get in this lecture from me is that business studies, especially HR and marketing, are kind of like a waffle. Like, don't get me wrong, you need to know the syllabus, you need to know what certain points mean, and you need to know your definitions. But especially, I feel like HR and marketing, and I hope you guys find it easy and you agree with this, that if you just know like the main idea, everything else just flows on. And especially if you have a job, I think this is going to be even easier to retain. Um, but yeah, for the case studies, it kind of is easy to waffle on businesses that you are aware of, especially like Macca's, when you can talk about the My Macca's app or frozen Cokes going to $2. Like, that's all case studies. You can link that to the syllabus. It doesn't matter. That's all case studies. And they're all exemplars and examples that you can use. So I really recommend it. But that was probably the most popular question that we got today. Otherwise, there were some questions on how many actual examples to do. It does depend how many paragraphs you're doing. I always recommend 3 paragraphs for case essays, only because I just feel like you can get like quite a bit in and kind of separate your argument. But then again, there were some times where I only did 2 and I did 2 bigger paragraphs. I think once I even did like up to 4 paragraphs. Like, it's up to you and what the question is, and you'll know depending on the question. Like, if it is asking about processes and strategies, you might want to do more so you can separate them. But if it's just asking about processes, you can just do 2 big process paragraphs. It's just up to you. It's up to you, and it's up to what the question is. Um, but I think as a base, having at least 4 case study examples, and good ones. I'm talking like statistics and just really good details or price increases or a very specific example. At least 4, but I think definitely as you're getting towards 6 and even anything above. In saying that, you don't have to overdo it. Like, 12 case studies, look, if you want to, like, I'm not stopping you, but your case studies are not like little quotes that you just like drop in English, you give a technique and you move on. Your case studies really, it's you pop in that case study, you're analyzing that case study, but then you're linking it back to the question, and you have to write a substantial amount about each. And it's very hard to do that if you're writing heaps of case studies. But in saying that, you don't want to write too little and then you don't have enough evidence and your essay is pure content. Because if they wanted that, it wouldn't be a case study essay. So I just think having that balance, and that's why I feel like 4 to 6 is a pretty achievable goal. Of course, like, I feel like getting closer to 6, and that was always my goal, I was like, just try to hit 6 case studies. But it really depends on your timing and it depends on the question. So don't pressure yourself too much in that. I think as long as you're between that range, you're good. Anyways, not to plug the HR Notes TikTok again, but I posted these fill in the blanks as well, and I'm trying to get out a lot of business studies kind of resources, whatever I can. So if you guys have any resources that you'd like to see, or any business study videos, or even if there's like a certain dot point, maybe from finance, for example, something that you're confused on, I'm happy to do like a summary video and be like, this is, I don't know, cash flow management strategies in 1 minute. If that's something that anyone, even if like just one person wants it, I don't care. I'll make it for that one person. If there is anything that anyone would like, please let me know. But definitely give it a follow. I'm going to stop plugging from now on. But these are all online, and you can save them, crop them, and print them. And this is definitely a last resort for when you are starting to prepare for your trials and for your HSC, because it will show you what you know. I don't think you should try this if you haven't memorized the syllabus yet, or if you don't feel confident. Like, if you're looking at this and you're thinking there is no way I can fill that in, don't do it. print out the actual syllabus and start reading over that over and over again, then test yourself, use acronyms, and then when you feel more confident and once you can fill this in, you're good to go. But I have that for each of the subjects, so if you didn't want to follow us, you can just download these slides and take a screenshot of them, or even screenshot them now if you like. It's up to you. So that's for HR, that's for operations in case anyone's screenshotting, that's for marketing, and then that's for finance. And I just wanted to put these again. I've posted these online if anyone wants to save them. Just go to TikTok. But these are my summary notes. These are just examples from my marketing ones. My summary notes personally, I know some people will do even more summarized. But for me, like my summary notes, I wanted them to have the point, but also have definitions, just so like I had that definition there, I could read over and be like, yep, I know this. Yep, I know this. While I feel like if I just had the point, like if I just saw um like profit maximization, customer orientation, I could be like, yeah, I know that, but then to actually define customer orientation like is a whole different thing. So I just feel like this is what works for me. You might want yours even more summarized, and that's what I mean. Like it's really up to you. But personally for me, having these was such a game changer because it just showed me what I knew and what I didn't know. It had the entire syllabus and all the main points, and all that was missing was that extra detail for those extra couple of marks. But that was kind of all stuff that you can waffle on anyways. These are like the main points, and it covers every single dot point. And like I said earlier, I separated all my notes by the dot point, and I think that made such a big difference in my study. Just so I could really, as I was studying my notes, I was also memorizing the syllabus, and I could really just pair everything together and the content together, which made answering questions even easier. So that's my advice. I'm gonna get out my other ones as well if anyone's interested. Not that I think my notes are like the best in the world, but if anyone would like some summarized notes or you're not finished yours yet, um, you can definitely check those out. Now we're gonna get onto role of HR. I'm gonna drink some water because we have a lot of talking to do today. But let's talk about the role of HR. I don't want to hear anyone hate on the role of any of the functions, because even finance, which like I said, I'm a hater, the role is just chef's kiss. I just feel like role every single time. The fact that interdependence is like in all of them, and it's legit the same dot point like over and over again. You can't have beef with role. There's no way. Role is, I think, the best part of business studies. Anyways, human resource management um, has got to do with the total relationship between an employer and an employee to achieve the strategic goals of the business, which includes functions like recruitment, equal opportunity, training, development, separation, and aligning employees to business goals. It's just kind of like the general definition and where we kind of want to start at. HR, if you haven't started it yet, is literally about the employer and the employee, and it's just about the workplace and hiring people, training people, keeping them, firing them, and dismissing them, dealing with like absenteeism and workers not coming to work and workers leaving the job, dealing with disputes. It's kind of just like the entire work environment. So I think HR is really good, and I definitely think, like I said before, if you have a job, HR I feel like makes even more sense. Not that you're at some disadvantage if you don't have a job, but I didn't get a job until after HSC, and then after like I got a job, I was like, oh, like I learned like this, like all the HR stuff, and especially now, like as I lecture, like there's so many connections, so I can imagine what it would have been like if I had a job at the time. So if you guys do and you guys are working in year 12, that there's definitely a really good link there. So an employer for legal purposes is going to exercise control over employees. They have the responsibility for payment of wages. They also hold the power to dismiss their employees. Now, I want you guys, if you are screenshotting anything or if anybody is writing notes, I'd say this is honestly one of the most important slides on this entire document, if not the most important. And I only say that because it's all about what human resource management wants to achieve. And these are kind of like thesis statements for English. Like, you know, those thesis statements that are always, no matter what question you get, like there's just some points for your essays that are always going to work. These are those points in business studies. So for human resource management, the goal is always to strengthen the employee and employee relationship, that they're treating employees as an asset and they're spending time, money, and resources to strengthen them, that they're allowing employees to facilitate the strategic goals, the values, and the mission of the business, that they're also rewarding employees and making them feel value. And then by doing that, they're strengthening their contribution to the business, that they're receiving some profitability and productivity from your employees and considering them as an investment, but that they're also reducing conflict. No matter what question you get, I promise you, in your essay, in your report, in your short answers, I promise you one of these lines is going to work. No matter what, because this is like the basis of HR. It's all about the employees. And it's all about, like, in the end, like profitability and productivity and reducing those conflicts. Let's talk about interdependence. I know it comes up so much, it like it gets annoying, but it is a learn to, and you'll probably get it at least once in your paper. I feel like most past papers I've seen in trials in HSC have had at least one interdependence question. And it is a learn to. So learn tos, if you're not aware, the learn about's like the general syllabus points that we saw before and like those fill in the blanks, and that's what you're learning about in the specific content. The learn tos is specifically what NESA and the skills they're looking for you to adopt. And that means that the learn twos are much more likely to come up in an exam, which is why I really emphasize and I try to put as many of the learn twos for HR in here, only because they just are more common and more likely to be assessed. So for finance and HR has to have adequate funds to attract, train, and develop staff. So then they're going to rely on finance to record and summarize the financial transactions that then reflect the true values of the business. And then HR needs those funds from them to staff and fund the effective HR strategies. Everyone essentially, guys, is just working, like, they're all interconnected, they're all interlinked, they all run off each other. But in every single case, and I'm going to tell you now for HR, the answer is that HR is acquiring, training, and maintaining staff for the other function. So in this case, that it's for the finance function. In marketing, which I've got here, it's hiring people for marketing and to undertake market research and then the different processes and strategies. But in that way as well, HR managers are then reliant on the marketing managers to identify and meet the needs of the wants and the needs and wants of customers through market research, which they can then get from their HR workers and by acquiring the right staff with the right skill set to do that. So it's going back and forth. You guys can screenshot these or take notes, but really, like, you're not gonna get like anything more than maybe a 5 marker max. It feels wrong even saying that. It is very common to come up in the short answer section, if anything, but it's just not necessary to know it in super great detail. This is just really, if you're struggling with interdependence, I just wanted to put these up on here because it's got the full analysis. But really, as long as you know one way that marketing is helping HR and one way that HR is helping marketing, you're all good to go. And then for operations, they're producing goods and services through the transformation process. So HR management has to manage the relationship between employees and employers to enable the business to then achieve that and carry that out as best as possible. And HR does deal with parts of outsourcing and employment resourcing through acquisition, development, maintenance, which is all about hiring, training, and keeping staff. So they're just honestly working hand in hand, and HR um, is giving operations those staff to carry out the transformation process. But that's all really that interdependence is, and then operations is, of course, actually producing the goods and services. Then that gives those HR workers a job. So it's honestly like, I feel like it all works hand in hand, and they're both going both ways. Now, most often business changes are conducted with the goal in reduction in cost and increased productivity, but that is hard to do because how are you going to increase productivity but reduce your cost? Like, usually increased productivity is going to come at an increased cost, but realistically, and something that's so important to remember in business studies is that the bottom line is that all businesses want to profit. I know you guys learn about corporate social responsibility and look at us and like we're so ethical and social influences and everything else, and don't get me wrong, it's definitely consideration. And when, especially marketing, they go so on about the needs and wants of the customer, the only reason they're doing that is because they want to profit. Like, let's be real, profitability and profit maximization needs to come up in any essay that you write because it is consistently the goal in every single function. profit max profit maximization is the answer. It is the answer. It's always going to be the goal. Even if they're trying to achieve cost leadership, if they're trying to achieve customer orientation, no matter what the goal is, competitive advantage, it doesn't matter. It's always going to be profit maximization at the core. At the core, and that's how businesses are. It's to make a profit, and that's actually in the definition of a business, which is that they're selling goods and services for a profit, or with the goal of obtaining a profit. So that's important to understand. But how can you achieve a profit? That's by reducing costs. But you also want to increase your productivity, which can then improve your profitability even more, which you can achieve through outsourcing, which is obtaining goods, services, or in this case, labor, um, by contract from an outside supplier. Now, when we talk about outsourcing, I feel like it gets a bit confusing, especially if you've already finished operations, because you're like, wait, we did outsourcing there. Um, but this outsourcing is specifically about labor because in HR, you're looking at workers and employers and employers. So that's where we're looking at like outsourcing labor, but also outsourcing the different processes. So even if you guys have applied for a job, or even if you haven't, you've probably heard of Indeed or Seek and how you can go and find jobs on there. That's outsourcing the acquisition process, and that's just an example of outsourcing. But also stuff like Airtasker, not to bring up Taylor Swift, because I don't want to talk about how long I was in that line for. I mentally cannot. But I know I remember seeing TikToks that people were paying $100 on Airtasker, to like outsource, like waiting for tickets. And stuff like Airtasker, stuff like Workmate is all examples of outsourcing labor. Now it's easy because of globalization. It's also easier because there's so many changes in technology that like if I wanted to like get like a random plumber for my tiling business, like to fix something, I don't have to hire this whole new plumber. I could literally just outsource it and get it done in the day. But it also ensures that there's great accessibility to HR. So the incentive of outsourcing human labor reduces costs, it improves quality, it fosters innovation, it focuses on the core function, and increases the speed to the market. So there are a lot of benefits, but especially when you get to global outsourcing, it does get a little bit dangerous and it gets a bit risky. So, outsourcing in HR is when you use a contractor, an external provider of services to a business. They're primarily used to provide flexibility or to provide greater expertise and specialist skills. But what's the most important thing to remember, and it's the same with outsourcing and global outsourcing in operations, is that you lose control over quality and performance. Contractors are also very expensive, and they do need to be compensated for annual leave and other entitlements, just depending on who you're hiring. But especially with Airtasker and Workmate, like it is expensive. Um, but the loss of control is definitely the biggest disadvantage, only because, especially for a small business where they've got very tight control, you don't want to be giving these really like core functions away to these random contractors in like a complete another country. And yeah, it really depends on the size of the business and how willing the owners are to give up control. But quality and performance are very important, so it does come at that risk. So this is just a little bit more about using contractors, but the main point here is that they're generally recommended for non-core functions and focusing on the broader aspects of the business. These are some of the other risks. I think some of the other ones definitely come in, and especially when you're talking about global outsourcing. And I only bring this up because it is a learn to, which is discuss the advantages and disadvantages of outsourcing in the global market. We just looked at the advantages before, which have a lot to do with productivity and reducing costs. But in terms of the risk, it is very difficult to control the quality and reliability, which can then limit the extent of control a lot of the time. And this learn to is in the global market, so there are cultural differences which make language or accents, um, and it also means that there's a lack of remedies for legal matters under foreign systems, because depending what country it is, they'll have different legislation, which can impact just the contractor and the outsourcing in that market. But especially with languages or accents, and you can bring up call centers, and a lot of companies I know definitely for a fact Telstra, only because I've been on the phone with them. And the call centers are outsourced to other countries. And definitely the language barriers can impact your customer service and do cause like a lot of complaints. And well qualified employees can also be replaced with less qualified staff, which then the quality declines. So it is risky in that sense, and it's really up to the business if that's something that they are willing to risk. Okay, that's role. That's actually all of role. Doesn't really get too much more detail than that. I think the best part of it to know, well, not the best part of it to know is like the first part. But um this is a learn too, so I just really recommend when you are going through your study. I feel like this is something that I avoided. I feel like some dot points in business, I was just like, I don't want to study this. Like, I never wanted to study the current legal framework, which we're about to do now, and like enterprise agreements and common law. There was never a point where I was like, I want to study this. But when I got to rewards and the strategies, I was like, okay, I'm gonna write about this. And whenever technology came up as an influence under any function, I was like, yep, I'm gonna pick this one. But yeah, outsourcing, I never liked talking about it. Personally, I never liked talking about it. But it is a learn too, and that's why I put it in here because I don't want you guys to get thrown off and it comes up in exam, which it did for my trials, live, laugh, love. Let's keep going. Let's talk about influences. So these are the influences. Don't get me wrong, I will choose technology and corporate social responsibility every single time. It's so easy to waffle them. This is such bad advice. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, but it is very easy to waffle them. And you kind of just need that general definition of what corporate social responsibility is and how technology is used in human resource management. But that's really all. And like an example. Everything else is kind of very self explanatory and very common sense, and you'll get the marks for it. But today we're specifically going through legal, which is the current legal framework, because the most questions do come from there. Um, and it's just so commonly assessed. And it's not hard. There's just a lot of content. Like all the content does make sense. But it, there's just a lot of it and it can get confusing. Let's talk about common law. So, the common law duty of employers, they've got a duty of care, a duty to pay the agreed wage, and a duty to provide work. That's the duty of employers. At the base, do you have to know all of this? I feel like a lot of it comes, like knowing the duty of care is obviously to care um, for their skills and for their knowledgement and to minimize risks, but really up to you what you want to note down from this. And for duty of employees, they've obviously got the duty to obey lawful instructions and commands, the duty to work with skill, and the duty to disclose relevant information, especially if they've got pre-existing medical conditions and things that could possibly cause caution or danger in the future. But that's at the core, just kind of what the duties are. Rights and obligations are very commonly tested. So here we've got a question from HSC 2015, which says describe one common law obligation of an employee. And that's where something as simple as obeying lawful and reasonable commands made by the employer is like such a good point. And we've got this is actually the NESA sample answer. They've said one common law obligation is to obey lawful and reasonable commands made by the employer. Reasonable orders are those that do not expose employees to physical danger or contravene awards or existing laws. That's just an example. That's the NESA sample answer that they've given you. Trust me, I've tried. I've tried. Where if you like don't know one common law or you're not sure if it's right, you write like two, and you're like, oh, like here's one, but like here's another, and you think that like if you write two in less detail, you're gonna get 2 marks, but they've specifically asked for one, and they're gonna mark the one that you wrote. So you're not gonna get the marks that way. This one's only out of two. So you just have to fill the lines provided. But even in this sample answer, they've made 1 point and then expanded on it, and that's all they expect. So that's important to remember. Okay, this is where it gets a little bit more technical. Let's talk about the differences between awards, enterprise agreements, and individual agreements or contracts. So, an award is like, this is so bad. The examples that I give in business studies are so like, and I always tie it back to what helped me memorize it. But awards, I always think like participation award, and that helped me think like, oh, everyone gets one. Because most people and most workers are under an award. Like, if you're working in retail, you're under the retail award. So an award is an industry or occupation-based award which covers all private sector employers and employees who perform work that falls within their scope. It outlines the minimum terms and conditions in a particular industry, and it's done with negotiation, discussion with trade unions, Fair Work, and the industry, but nothing to do with the specific employers or their employees. That's the most important thing. It's with the trade unions and with Fair Work in the actual industry, but it's not specifically involving anyone. So just like if you, and we'll be able to compare it to the other ones later, but it is very general. You don't have a say in your award. It's kind of like, okay, you're under the retail award. Here's your contract, sign. Okay, you're hired. Everyone kind of gets one. The difference with enterprise agreements is that they're collective agreements made at a workplace level between employers and employees about the terms and conditions of employment. So the difference that comes in here is that the agreement is actually made between employers and employees together at a workplace level. So it's actually within that enterprise. So a specific business might have a specific enterprise agreement, and that's going to be different to heaps of businesses that can all be under the retail award. And then the final one is the individual agreements or contracts, which exist when an employer and an individual employee negotiate a contract covering pay and conditions. It's more common in the private sector where they're earning over 133 grand of a salary, but individual agreement or contract, you need to remember it's literally one-on-one. So it's one worker and their boss. The enterprise agreement is the boss and a lot of workers. The award, no boss, no workers. It's just the industry, it's fair work, it's just this is how it is. It's the trade unions, and they've all decided. And most retail stores, and when you go to the shops, and even like in hospitality and just the main different industries of consumerism, a lot of them are under awards. That's very important to remember. But yeah, enterprise agreement is within the enterprise, and then individual agreement is one-on-one. I feel like enterprise and individual can get confusing because enterprise is still within the business, but again, it's all the employees and the employees coming to that collective agreement, while individual is seriously one-on-one. That's the difference between them. So an employment contract is therefore just a legally binding formal agreement between an employer and employee. And by signing written contracts, parties can clarify key duties and responsibilities of a job, ensuring individuals understand what the job entails. Now, the key features of an employment contract, there are so many. I think some of the main ones are definitely salary and wages, your hours, the leave, the overtime, and the benefits. But we're going to get into that when we talk very soon about the National Employment Standards. Now, a contract is valid and legally enforceable when parties involved intend to create legal relationships. One party offers, so they give you the contract, you offered the job, and the other party accepts. The consent is genuine, it's not pressured, that acceptance, and that both parties do obtain a benefit. So for the employer, they're getting a worker and they're getting the skills and the value of that worker as an asset, and for the employee, they're getting a pay. But also those non-monetary rewards of the job. But like bottom line, like they have a job, they're getting paid. The contracts can be written or unwritten, but it is important to remember that a written contract is going to give more protection to both parties than a verbal contract, because you can say like in court, like, oh, but he told me this, but like, where's your receipts? Where's your receipts? Show me the screenshots. Where is it? Like a written contract, especially when it's signed, you can't go against that. Like you signed it, it's terms and conditions, that's what it is. But yeah, this is just a couple kind of just dot points about employment contracts, which we just looked at. Now, within those are the minimum national employment standards. Now there are well, there's 11 minimum ones, but the 10 national employment standards were at first, which are the NES, were developed in consultation with businesses, unions, and the community, and they must be provided by employers and state the minimum conditions for employees. Now, you don't have to memorize all of them, but I memorized maximum weekly hours, annual leave, and public holidays, and they're just the minimum entitlements. As an employee, like as an employee in this country, you are entitled to this minimum. You are also entitled to work health and safety, and work health and safety is a very big part of current legal framework, but in a lot of workplaces it is such a big deal, and we're going to look at why. So Safe Work Australia was specifically established to conduct research and develop national standards, codes of practice, and common approaches to WHS laws. But there are constitutional limitations because in every single state and territory there's going to be different work health and safety legislation, and it differs depending on where you are in Australia. So that's something to watch out for. But it's most important to know that Safe Work Australia are the ones who established it. Now, I really recommend knowing Work Health and Safety Act 2011 Commonwealth, just knowing that act because it is such a good one to bring up. But under that and legally, business are required to provide a safe system of work to take steps to reduce risk to employees in the workplace, to take reasonable care for the health and safety of others, cooperating with employers and meeting their requirements, and establishing work health safety committees within the workplace where they've got more than, if only for workplaces that have more than 20 employees, or if they're directed by WorkCover New South Wales, only so that they have consistent checkups on work health and safety. Now, work health safety is very, very important because of worker compensation. Now, worker compensation provides a range of benefits to an employee suffering from an injury or disease related to their work. It's provided to the family of the injured employees when their injury or diseases is caused by their work. And WHS laws and workers' compensation are both administered by WorkCover New South Wales. And there's insurance premiums which are linked to the number, frequency, and size of claims. Workers' comp is really important only because not only is it going to reduce your profitability if you have to pay for it, because it is a large cost, and you are compensating that injury, but on top of that, especially in the case that we're about to look at here, which is James Hardy, who was in charge of a cement manufacturing company, he didn't warn his staff of asbestos and its health effects, and that led to numerous employees suffering from negative impacts. Anyone that knows anything about asbestos, you've got to be in such extensive protection gear, and it is such a dangerous substance to be around. And he didn't warn his staff about it in like a cement in that industry. So not only did that gain a lot of public attention, but that ruined reputation is then going to affect profitability, and it's just really not worth it. No worker wants it. Sorry, I can't even say that. It's not that no worker wants it. You'd hope that no worker wants it, but no employer wants it. And it's not a good look on the business, but also obviously from a reputation, from a profitability point, but also from like a genuine care point for the well-being of people and of workers. You don't want your workers suffering from injury or disease because of the work environment that you are in charge of. You don't want that. That should not be something as a genuine human being. But that's workers' comp. Anti-discrimination. So discrimination occurs when a policy or a practice disadvantages a person or group because of a personal characteristic that is irrelevant to the performance of work. Anti-discrimination law was designed to protect employees from direct and indirect discrimination, because I feel like sometimes it's not as direct, and it's kind of just those little like indirect swings or indirect kind of procedures that you see or policies that you see, and you're like, low-key discrimination, but like it doesn't feel like it, but I know it is. Anti-discrimination law is to protect from both, and then to prevent discrimination and avoid fines, employees need to comply with legislation and audit all their policies and practices to ensure that they don't discriminate. Now, these are some of the anti-discrimination laws, and you'll know which one to choose depending on the question. For example, if they've got a question specifically about women and hiring women, automatically it's going to be Sex Discrimination Act, because that's an act and a legislation specifically to do with gender. But most of the time, the answer is going to be the Anti-Discrimination Act of 1977, and that's what it is going to be covering. Sometimes it can be affirmative action and the equal employment opportunity for women on top of that, and that's what I mean. It can get a little bit confusing because you're like, well, how do I know if it's a Sex Discrimination Act or if it's equal employment opportunity for women? But we're going to go through EEO now just so you can understand the difference between what affirmative action is and what the Sex Discrimination Act is covering. But these are the four main acts that they can ask you about, and I feel like if it does come up, it's going to be multiple choice. I feel like they love to bring up any act wherever possible, and you have to choose the right one. So I definitely recommend doing some practice with some past questions. But also in short answer, they won't specify the act a lot of the time, but they can ask like which anti-discrimination law, and you'd want to have a good understanding of one. So the equal employment opportunity, and what we're just talking about, which is affirmative action, refers to equitable policies and practices in recruitment, selection, training, and promotion. And it just ensures that the best person for the job is chosen with the skills that are relevant to that business need to then build a positive work environment. And the level of equity and the level of equal employment opportunities available is reflected through the opportunities for women and minority groups. So that's the difference with discriminating, like a woman with a discriminatory comment compared to discriminating a woman in the hiring process by not having um, opportunities for women, or just kind of having that assumption that like a man is built for the role, which unfortunately, and with things like the glass ceiling and some of those analogies, which are very real life, and the pay gap and the gender gap with wages and getting equal pay, these are real things. So this is how you can test the equity. Affirmative action specifically are the measures to eliminate the indirect and direct discrimination, and to try and implement positive steps that can overcome the lack of equal employment opportunity that we unfortunately have because of so much historical influences. Businesses do need to comply with discrimination provisions in the Fair Work Act of 2009, and the Fair Work Commission takes action to ensure existing or proposed awards and enterprise agreements do not discriminate. But that's all it really covers when it comes up to discrimination. So let's look at a past question. We've got this one from the 2013 HSC. So full-time permanent employees in Australia are generally entitled to 4 weeks annual leave. What is the legal basis for this? If you guys are on the live chat, please leave your guess if you feel confident to. But I just want you guys to have a think about this, and let's think back. I don't want to say the answer, but let's think back to some of those points and some of the minimum entitlements. And just think about the word, the fact that it says entitled. Think, okay, which out of these talk about entitlements? And if you remember, it would be the National Employment Standards, and that's why I do recommend memorizing at least 3 of them, because full-time and annual leave are annual leave is one of the dot points from that for full-time and permanent employees. That's one of the minimal entitlements. So by memorizing that and just knowing a couple, you're doing yourself some great work. Okay, we're gonna get to processes. I have already finished my water, so I will literally be back in 1 second. I promise. I'm just going to get my other water bottle because I'm doing a lot of talking. For that break, everybody can get a bit of a break from my voice, but she has returned. We're going to talk about processes. Now, processes with HR, I'm telling you now, I only have one side. I only have one side on processes, and the only reason for that is that processes and strategies overlap so much, and a lot of the time if they ask you on processes, they're going to connect it to strategies, so be prepared for that. But even in just looking at the syllabus, if we go way back to this slide here, okay, look at the length of processes is literally 4 dot points. Compare the length of these processes to processes of operations. Like, marketing processes and HR processes are so short and so straight to the point, but the easiest processes out of all of business studies, hands down, I will not take criticism, is the processes of HR. So I do just have a really general slide, and I am just going to go through it pretty generally. And I'm in saying that I'm going to make a lot of connections between the strategies and the processes, because usually they'll overlap them, and if they do ask you a case study question, they'll ask the connection. Well, not every single time, but a lot of the time they're going to bring up processes and strategies together, just because realistically there's not a lot to talk about in 4 dot points, while there is a lot to talk about in effectiveness, and there's a lot to talk about in strategies, and they are much more just heavy and more in-depth kind of dot points. But let's start with acquisition. So acquisition is literally just hiring. Like, if you haven't done HR yet, let me just tell you now, acquisition is hiring a worker, development is training and induction, maintenance is keeping the worker, and separation is getting rid of the worker, whether they leave voluntarily or you dismiss them. Peace out, goodbye. So HR processes is literally getting a job to quitting or getting fired. Like, it's every single step there, and it's very, very self-explanatory. So acquisition is attracting and recruiting the right staff for specific roles within a business. Development is developing and improving the skills, abilities, and knowledge of staff through induction and ongoing training. Maintenance is managing the needs of staff for health and safety, industrial relations, and legal responsibilities, including compensation. And separation is all about employees leaving the business voluntarily or through dismissal or retrenchment processes. Now, in saying that, development and maintenance come up and have the most overlap with the strategies, because there's just like there's the development process, there's a specific strategy on training and development, hand in hand. And maintenance goes so hand in hand with conflict, but it also goes very hand in hand with performance management and rewards. So that those are just some examples of how you can connect the processes and strategies. But I do recommend that for the other topics as well. So for example, for marketing, I'd really connect the process of identifying the target market to the strategy of promotion, only because if you know your target market, you can create much more catered advertisements and just use different techniques of promotion to cater specifically to that group. And that's just an example of how a process and strategy can kind of work hand in hand. And I think that's such a good idea moving forward in business studies. And as soon as I started doing that, I found past papers a lot easier, because it is really overwhelming if you see a question and it's bringing up processes and strategies together. You're like, not today. But there is a lot of overlap for all of them, for all the processes and strategies. So I definitely recommend, even if you just want to go to your syllabus and like highlight, like maybe like in blue you do like one process with two strategies, and then in green you do another process with another two. I don't know, up to you, no color discrimination, use whatever color you like, but that's just an example of something you can do. And I just remember I would just match some to each other, so in the case that I did get one where it was connecting it, I was able to know what to do. But development and maintenance are definitely the most important ones. Acquisition is important, but it's really just got to do with hiring staff. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about it because it does overlap with the strategy of recruitment, which is why like acquisition is literally just this process. Acquisition is literally just the recruitment strategy. HR processes and strategies, and I just said it now, but honestly it's so interconnected. So all of this, I know we've got one slide, but it's only because I didn't want you to hear me say the same thing twice, even though I've been so repetitive this lecture. My apologies, but I didn't want to have to repeat it like intentionally twice when it's going to come up again. So I don't want to skip through this slide too fast, but I'm about to, so my apologies. But it's only because all of this we will be covering as we go through the strategies, and we're going to be making those connections. So the strategies that we're specifically covering today, sorry, I need some water. This is a long time to talk. Is leadership style, recruitment, performance management, and workplace disputes. There are obviously others. I love rewards. I will talk about rewards, and I would talk about rewards in like trials and HSC at any opportunity. I would find any way to talk about rewards, monetary, non-monetary. But today we are covering leadership style, recruitment, performance management, and workplace disputes, because these are the ones that are avoided, because some of the other ones are much, like training and development is so easy to talk about, honestly. And like how to like have like workshops and courses that can help like develop their skills. Like it's just so easy, and it's such a just an applicable strategy for so many different cases and business reports. But these are the ones that come up, and these are the ones that not everyone, but that a lot of people want to run away from, especially workplace disputes and leadership style. I feel like quite a few people get confused on it, and I know workplace disputes, like I just didn't want to look at it. Workplace disputes and current legal framework, I was just like, no. I was like, I love HR, but like I'm blind. I don't know what they are. When I was studying, but then when I got to trials, those were the ones that were coming up, and I was like, maybe I need to focus on these a bit. So again, they are, and a lot of these things that I am mentioning and most of these slides are learned too, so I really do recommend knowing them. But let's start off with what leadership style actually means. So leadership style is just the ways that managers communicate with their employees to inspire and motivate them to work together to achieve an organization's goals. And it's really just got to do with leadership and the command and control, and how everyone's working together, or if they're working together. So let's talk about autocratic leadership. So autocratic leadership is when managers make decisions without staff input. So they're kind of just at the head. They're like, okay, you know what? You're all going to follow, you're all going to listen to this, and that's what it is. Now, it's great for unskilled workers. It's pretty mean to say like unskilled. Like everybody has skills. Everybody, everybody has skills. I don't really think that there's a single person in the world that's unskilled. That's low key mean. But um, in I don't want to get cancelled. Um, it's more for unskilled workers when workers aren't really working as closely with management, and not necessarily unskilled in our eyes, but unskilled in management's eyes. And unfortunately, very common. That's a very common perception, especially in factory settings and that factory industry. With factory workers, they're kind of unfortunately perceived as unskilled. Um, which means that a lot of managers are making decisions and obviously not considering them. It involves high levels of organization and control, but all that can do is increase absenteeism, which is workers being absent from work, so just not showing up, and staff turnover, which is workers leaving the job. And the higher your staff turnover, the worse it looks for your business, because people are going to be like, why are so many people leaving? Like, why do they want to get away from this business so bad? It is something to consider. So, it's more of like a transactional management style where they're like, you listen to us, you get your money, but you don't get a say. And it implements the most efficient, productive, and profitable methods of work. That's always kind of their goal, but it's risky, and we're going to talk about it. Now, the opposite is participative or democratic leadership approach, which is very big on the group consensus and generating new ideas together. It's very big on like the role of motivation. It's like, hey, everybody's involved, you can all help, we've got to make this big this big business decision. We want to hear your input. And it's really linked to transformational leadership, which is allowing workers to grow into roles into management and kind of like transforming their own skills. And managers do have a higher expectation of their workers because they are involving them in decision making, which is directly affecting the business. But that only means that the workers are feeling higher job satisfaction because they're involved, but also higher levels of engagement, and they just feel more important, and then they therefore feel more valued, which can help decrease absenteeism and staff turnover. So I'm sure how you can see as a worker that being part of a participative or democratic leadership approach, you'd feel just a lot better about your job in it than you would as an autocratic and just kind of being like forced to just listen and obey whatever instruction and decision they've made without any input, especially if you're the ones doing the work. Now, some of the other ones are visionary, which is very big on like long-term vision and leadership. There's pace setting, which is all about accomplishment to high standards, and coaching, which is the professional growth of the employees. But the main two that they're going to be asking you on is autocratic and participative. Now, to teach you guys the difference, I wanted to give you this HSC question. So it says, a business in crisis needs to make immediate and timely decisions in order to survive. Which leadership style does a manager of this business need to adopt? I want you guys to have a little bit of a think. It's important to remember it's immediate and it's timely. So which is going to suit that? And it's for the sake of survival. Like the business could fall apart if you choose the wrong answer. I'm joking. But have a little think. And if anyone's on the live chat and wants to let me know what they think the answer is, you can just type in the letter. And we will have a go at it. But for this one, the answer is A. Now, why is it autocratic? It's autocratic because autocratic is when the management make the decisions that it's flowing down. The only reason for this one that it would be autocratic and it wouldn't be democratic is because it's an immediate and timely decision in order to survive. So I think it's so important to picture these situations. Imagine a business is literally on the on the urge of bankruptcy, about to die, about to fail, just as an example. And they need to make this survive or die decision. Do they have time to call up everyone? Let's get every employee of the company. Let's all have a meeting and sit down. What do you guys think we should do? No. Like realistically, it's immediate and timely. And the fact that they put the word survive, Like it is desperate times. They don't have time here to listen to everyone's like this is so mean. But realistically, as a manager, and in these cases, imagine yourself as a manager. Like if your business was on the urge of breaking down, are you gonna stop and ask all your employees what they think you should do? Or because it's immediate and you have to make a timely decision, you're like, okay, I need to step in and I need to enforce my control. In this case, it's going to be A, and that's why you would choose A, and that's kind of the difference where an autocratic answer would come up, especially with those heavier decisions and very big ones, but also just with ones that need to be made in a timely manner. So let's get on to recruitment, and I put in recruitment in this slide only because it overlaps so much with acquisition, um, which we're kind of covering a process and strategy in one. Look at us. But recruitment is the process of locating and attracting the right quantity and quality of staff to apply for employment vacancies or anticipated vacancies at the right cost. So, poor selection process, and if you're not recruiting good people, you're actually increasing your costs and lowering the productivity because you're increasing the training costs, you're increasing job dissatisfaction, lower performance, and higher turnover, which then leads to high absenteeism rate, which is going to lower your productivity, which then lowers your um, profits, but also accident or defect rates. And if that happens to be under worker compensation, peace out. Goodbye to you. So, a poor selection process, it's just not worth it. Recruitment is so, so important. And it's so important that they're not hiring the wrong people and they're really choosing the best possible first person for the job. So, the two types of recruitment are internal recruitment and external recruitment. Now, internal recruitment is filling job vacancies with people inside the business. So, let's say I've been working in a business for 10 years. They come out and they're like, hey, we've got a new national manager position and we're offering it to someone within the business. Send an email through to me and we can book in an interview if you're interested. And it's only like exclusively open to people within the internal business. That's why it's called internal recruitment. It's internal, it's within the business. It can be used as a form of motivation and reward for employees because realistically, like, just think of like a typical like Facebook post where it's like I feel like a lot of people like I got the promotion or like to add to your LinkedIn, guys, when you leave school, personally, I haven't jumped on the train, but like all of my friends have it. LinkedIn becomes like the new, it's like Insta for work. I'm not sure if any of you guys have it yet. I have not jumped on yet. I'm trying to stay away from it. Um, but I see people scrolling through LinkedIn on the train, but it's literally just for work. It's like a social media for work, but I'm going off topic. All I'm saying is that promotions will always motivate workers, and always give them that sense of reward because, again, promotions usually do come with higher responsibility and thus higher pay. So, as an employee, like, you're not going to complain and you are gaining more power and more control. So, that's always going to look like a win. There's not a lot of times that people will be complaining and, like, oh no, like, they're offering a new promotion to us, like, oh, I've got an interview for a promotion, oh no, like that's not really how the dialogue goes. While external recruitment is filling job vacancies with people outside the business. Now that's great and that's fun, but we have some issues with that and we're going to talk about that. So the advantages of internal recruitment is that first you're motivating staff to stay with the business. That builds their commitment and loyalty because they're like, wow, you're, instead of going and just hiring someone random, you're choosing one of us and you're remaining committed to us, and that just makes everyone feel really happy inside. It gives development opportunity for them as well because they have that opportunity to then develop within their skills and within their job position. It's really important to remember that the internal already know the culture. They already know the business, they already know the values. It's not like you have to kind of like mold them to fit that, especially if they've been working there for 5, 10 years. Like, it makes a lot of sense. It's cheaper because it's not like you have to pay um like a recruiting office or Indeed or Seek for an ad. You literally can just have a meeting and be like, hey guys, we're doing interviews, come if you want. And it's a lot cheaper to fill them. And you can also fill the positions faster because you've got all the details of the workers. You might essentially only need one interview and know because I don't know, this worker could have been working for you for 10 years. So internal recruitment is definitely a good idea, but in everything and kind of all of business, as much as there are some really great strategies that you can enforce, there's always going to come a disadvantage with it. So the disadvantage is that it can reinforce a negative culture because it can lead to internal rivalry. And especially when there's lots of workers going for one position and they all work in the same company and they all have different relationships with the boss, and everyone's going to think like, oh, he's like the suck up, he's the one that never shows up, like how are you going to hire this person who doesn't come in and calls in sick all the time. There's always just going to kind of be those comments and those kind of drama that they really want to stay away from, and it's just going to enforce a negative culture. You also need to manage the unsuccessful applicants and fallouts. Like pretty sad to like offer it to people. Like of course, naturally the nature of work is that one person will get it, but you do have to manage like what you're going to do for those unsuccessful applicants and how they're going to react. And it is very likely that if they don't get the promotion, they might take it personally. Um, or they might just think, you know what, I'm going to start looking for other work, and then they leave. So it is hard in that sense when you are going internally. And little value is low key added or no new skills, because these are people that like you already have in the business. You already know their skills. You already know their value. So what promoting them, like what they did, they just get a new title. Like no, nothing's actually changing. Like they haven't actually developed this new skill. They don't really have necessarily this more value that they're bringing. They've just got a fancier title. Something better for their LinkedIn. I got promoted post on Facebook. Anyways, this is a case study from Foxconn. Foxconn, I searched it this morning. Foxconn develops over 70% of Apple's technology, and they are some of the biggest technology producers for some of the major countries in the world, including America. So for each new module, guys, did you hear that statistic? That was my case study. For each new module, over 100,000 workers are recruited to keep up with demand. And they've utilized external recruitment, online advertising, distributing leaflets to generally skilled migrant workers at railway terminals in labor-rich Chinese provinces. That's how they have recruited their stuff. But I think that external recruitment in such a large business, like if you are for every single model you're getting over 100,000 workers, like I'm positive they're not going to be that cut if like one person gets a promotion, because there's so many people working and it's just such a big business. While for small businesses, um external recruitment can be taken more personally, because it's like, oh, but we've been here, we're loyal to you, what's going on? Okay, let's talk a little bit about performance management. It is important that we cover it because it links a lot to maintenance. So performance management addresses both individual and business performance. So it's looking at how the business is performing, it's looking at how the individual is performing, and it's kind of like, I don't know if you guys have seen in movies when they're like really stressed out for like their performance management review or their performance review, and they're looking at like their stats and all their data, they're looking at their reviews. Um, but naturally, successful individual performance is really most of the time going to translate to the business's strategic objectives being met. Because if the individuals are working hard and you've got this individual working hard and this individual working hard and this individual working hard, they're going to come together and collectively then be able to help meet those strategic goals. So, features of performance management include job design, recruiting the best staff, training and development, and rewards. But the two components of performance management are administrative and developmental, and it's really important that you know the difference. So, administrative is when management conducts annual meetings with all employees. The most important thing to know is that administrative is for everybody, tells them what they're doing well and what they're not doing so well, makes a record of all the data together, and then they're using that information to conduct next steps, which is like, oh, we're going to enforce more training. We're going to have a reward system for whoever sells the most this. I used to work in retail. I recently quit, but I'm turning this into a life story. But we had like you know when like it was obviously like paper bags, but we also had like tote bags that like you pay, like you know when you go, like I didn't work at Cotton On, but when you go to Cotton On, like they've got like the tote bag that you can buy. We had that as well. And we would do, like my boss would do reward programs where it's like, oh, whoever sells the most tote bags over the weekend is like gets a free lunch, or like can like go get a drink with my cut or whatever. It's just an example, just like a little incentive. But that was all from a review of our performance at selling those bags. It's such a little example, but it's just to kind of explain it. That's an example of how rewards can be used in relation to a performance review of like the data. In that case, it was how many bags could I sell. But the thing about administrative performance management is that it's designed to improve group performance, not individual, it's group performance. It's an annual meeting with all the employees. So it's like those movie scenes where everyone's sitting and it's got like the massive desk and everyone's on their wheelie chairs and it's like got the city views with the glass outside. It's everyone sitting and they're showing there's like the CEO, like the manager there with like the slideshow and they're pointing and they're like, this is last year's data, this is right now's data, what's going on everybody, we're doing this good, we're not doing this good, this is what we're going to do, we need more training on this, all of you have to do this module on this skill to develop it because we're not doing well enough here. And it's kind of very general for everyone and it's in a group setting. So administrative is in a group setting. Developmental is when it gets more personal. So developmental is using data to develop the individual skills and abilities of the employees so that they can then improve their effectiveness in the role. Now, it's best achieved through year-round periodic feedback and shared discussion that is both empathetic and goal-focused. So feedback is 100% the most important part of developmental feedback, of developmental performance management. And developmental performance management is all about improving individual performance. So administrative is improving group performance, while developmental is improving individual performance. And I think feedback is the best way to do it. The risk with feedback is that it can come off in such a horrible way. Like, just think of when you get like an English essay back. Like, don't tell me there's not one person watching this that when you get like an English essay back, sometimes like the feedback just seems personal. Like it just seems off, and it doesn't even have to be English, it could be another subject, but you just know when it crosses the line of feedback and you're like, is this feedback? Like, are you trying to help me improve or are you low key insulting me? But it comes up the same way in developmental, and because it is one on one, a lot of workers do prefer administrative because they're getting that kind of like group feedback and they're like, you might hear something and be like, oh, I'm not sure if I'm the best at that, but then remember like, oh, it's to the whole group, they're not pointing out anyone in specifically who's like, they're not like, you're the worst at this, you're second worst. They are going to point out good workers, but they're not necessarily pointing out the worst. So a group setting a lot more people are comfortable with, while developmental is a little bit scarier because it's kind of looking at like those KPIs and like who's hitting their data, management reviews, and it's just a lot more personal. So it's really important that when you are having that discussion between the employer and the employee about these things, that it is empathetic and that's goal focused. So you can't be too nice about it and be like, you know what, like I know you only sold one tote bag, but like it's all good. I'm just happy you tried your best. We're not going to be too like away from the goal and just too kind of easy with it. We're going to be like, look, like you sold one, it is what it is, but our goal is to sell 20. So I need you to step it up. And that's very different to me saying, I can't believe you sold one. How hard is it to sell a bag? What's wrong with you? All of those are feedback, but they all come off in very different ways. And the best thing about that middle ground feedback, where it's like, look, it is what it is. You should have sold more. This is what you can do to sell more. Next time, try start opening with this. And just giving that constructive criticism, that's empathetic, but it's also goal focused and balancing that. 'Cause you don't want to be too nice that you're missing the goal, but you don't want to just focus on the goal and then you have no empathy and you just forget that you're talking to a human. So that's the importance of performance management. It is so I don't know why there's like some line here. Analyzing performance is so important because it helps identify opportunities for productivity improvement. It can assess the performance against the organizational standards, but also provide feedback and recognition, which is very, very important. In HR, you have to remember, especially with like a business, and I feel like some schools do this where I know my school did this for teachers who had been at the school for like 10 years or 5 years, 15 years, 20 years. They had like different awards, and they'd like present them like with our graduation and be like, okay, here's like the 20 year of like service to our school award, and teachers would get that. But that's just an example of recognition. It kind of overlaps with rewards, but recognition is so important to employees who are showing up every single day. I feel like, especially as an employee rather than an employer, it's very easy to feel like, oh, like I'm the one who's putting in all the work and they're just getting away with it and they never praise me and they're never proud of me. So recognition is so big and it's honestly just validation. But it is nice to get when you are working hard and especially when you are committed and loyal to the company. It can also help you justify staffing decisions. So if they see like, and it's staffing decisions on both ends, they can see that maybe one person has improved like their stats by nearly 15%, they're going to be like, you know what, it would probably be good to give her a raise, or it probably would be good to consider her for this new promotion. And then that's going to go into recruitment as a staffing decision. Or it can go the complete opposite way and be like, look, this person's dropped 10% and has the worst reviews we've ever seen for the company. Let's get them out. That's just an example, but it also can help identify training and developmental needs. So, because from that, you can look at the data and be like, okay, we're getting really bad reviews about our customer service. Let's go back and train our workers on how to talk to customers and how to make them feel comfortable but not crossing the line, because no one anything more than hi, how are you, and if you say, oh, I'm good, just browsing, like, the combo doesn't need to go on. You've shut it down. But just an example. Just an example. Anyways. Um the developmental benefits, which is the one-on-one benefits, is that it assists with HR planning. It identifies training and development and legal compliance needs. It helps the business plan how to overcome weaknesses in performance, because it is so one-on-one like that. And especially if they have a conversation and they're like, okay, let's just say sorry guys, I only sold 2 tote bags. And my boss comes up to me and it's like, look, why are you only selling two tote bags? And I can admit, like, oh, I'm really shy to ask. Then they can see that kind of personality trait and like any shyness or awkwardness as a weakness in performance. And then the business can take that and make plans on how we can overcome that. And, oh, should we do practice role plays? Should we have some kind of like sentence starters, like, oh, did you know you can get this tote bag? Like, oh, before you mention the other bags, like, bring up the tote bag. I don't know. I'm going to stop talking about this tote bag. It's literally just an example. But that's just an example of overcoming weakness. Evaluating the rewards and the benefits program. Obviously, if the rewards and the benefit program is super great at a company, everyone's going to be trying to achieve them and work towards it, which great for them because there's a possibility of reward, but also great for the business because everyone's productive and everyone's showing up to work. But overall, it just helps identify, motivate, and retain talented staff. Now, administrative, which is improving the group performance, and in that group setting, higher productivity and better financial performance, because and those are like the advantages in that sec, only because it's in such a group setting and watching the others, and kind of building everybody up together and being like, okay, look, like, let's all do this, like, teamwork. It's kind of always going to do the trick. It can also help assess the rewards and the benefits, and it builds that self-motivation and retention, but also creates the opportunity for feedback that they can gain. And because it doesn't feel personal and it's kind of like constructive criticism to everyone, it is a lot safer in that way, that it can actually influence productivity, while you can be influenced towards limited productivity if you get really bad feedback and it just feels like an attack rather than it does like an opportunity to improve in the developmental feedback process, because it is one-on-one. So that is the difference between the groups. Now, let's talk about disputes. So fun. We're going to talk about arbitration, mediation, and that, because, again, if you do legal studies, I don't want to hear it. You should be an expert. You should be an expert because this is one of the points where they're going to overlap. But if not, we're going to go through it. Let me be so honest with you. I didn't actually know this until trials. Like, I understood it and I was like, okay, well, there's going to be disputes, there's going to be conflicts. But in terms of actually differentiating them, I was not the best at it. And I would kind of be like, oh, like, I think mediation is this, but I get it confused with conciliation. Like, we're just getting them all mixed up. So I don't want you to feel bad if that's you. Because and I think what the best thing about trials is, it really shows you what you know and what you don't know. You might think you know it all, but like, you see a trials question, you're like, I actually have no clue about this topic. So I wanted to bring up disputes only because it is very often avoided and no one really wants to study it, because compared to the other strategies, it's just not as fun as rewards. I'm going to bring back to rewards. We love rewards. We love rewards, but disputes are conflicts, disagreements, or dissatisfaction between individuals or groups. Disputes are really dangerous because they can lead to absenteeism, lower productivity, loss of work days, increased levels of absenteeism, legal claims, and high staff turnover, which no business wants. Nobody wants this. Nobody wants this. And it's often and often that workplace dispute is then going to be caused by poor management policies, a lack of communication, so they're just not really talking enough with the workers and hearing them out, and recognizing the employees when implementing change. It's really important to remember that a lot of the time, especially in an autocratic leadership style, and this is where it overlaps, but when you are within that autocratic leadership style, a lot of those managers are implementing change and really big changes to the workers without communication or recognition with them or of them at all. And without that, the employees themselves just feel really disrespected, and just there's no consideration, or that they're not of value to the business, and it is hurtful, and it kind of feels a bit like betrayal, especially when it's like really big changes, only because it's like, well, why haven't you considered us? And especially we're going to talk a bit about like bus strikes and train strikes. I'm sure you guys can remember last year um all the problems with Opal, and all those like crazy delays, and how it was all over the news, and like the industry leaders talking. But that was just an example where management had made decisions and didn't go to communicate with um the workers and when they were implementing change, and that caused great problems because the employees don't actually feel recognized. So other industrial disputes can occur over wages, hours of work, enterprise agreement demands, job security, restructuring, but also issues surrounding work conditions. But usually the most common dispute has got to do with the employment contract or the award, which might be job security, WHS, union issues, etc. So that's kind of just the general gist of disputes. Now, an industrial dispute is a disagreement over an issue or group of issues between an employer and his employees, which results in employees ceasing work. That's very different to a strike, which is where workers withdraw their labor and they stop working completely. They are an overt form of industrial action and aim to attract publicity and support for the employee's case. So the strike, and I think the best example is the train strike, where they just stopped working. They're like, you know what, we're not going to work. And in this whole part of aiming to attract publicity, that was all over the news, everywhere, TikTok, everything. Like it was like, look at these crazy delays. I've been stuck at the station for 3 hours, all over 9 News, 7 News. It was everywhere. It attracted so much publicity. I will admit I don't watch the news that often, but I was watching the news because it was so public and it was affecting so many people. I just wanted to get to uni. But there were so many issues, and just because management had implemented change from their high level and hadn't considered the train drivers and these workers that are working every single day when they were making that change. So that's another difference. Another thing with strikes, you can look at teachers who go on strike, and whenever you guys have a strike day, I know it's like mad during school because you're like day off, but for teachers, they are striking for better working conditions and better pay, and salary increases, and that's just another example of withdrawing it. And all the time that attracts publicity, especially when like they're walking through the streets and like thousands of teachers will walk together. And it happens in all different industries. These are just like two examples, but that's an example of strikes. Now, lockout is when employers close the entrance to a workplace and refuse admission to workers. A lot of the other ones that we're looking at all have got to do with the workers enforcing that dispute. But the lockout is when the employers literally lock you out, they close the entrance, and no one's allowed in. So what the lockouts are used, they're frequently used in long disputes when it just keeps going on and they're like, you know what, like we're not going to put up with this. To promote concession bargaining, to push employees to sign individual agreements and in response to strike action. So they're like, you know what, if you're going to strike, like don't come back to work the next day. Sorry, I'm locking it. But honestly, all of these disputes just worsen the relationship between employer and employee. So obviously we want to live in a peaceful, loving, caring, respectful world, but lockouts are an example of how employers can refuse admission rather than strikes, or what we're about to look at, picket lines, which the workers are putting into place. Now, picket lines are protests that take place outside the workplace. I go to University of Sydney, but across a lot of the unis there are, and you guys will get ready for it if you are planning on going to uni. But last semester alone, I had 6 days off because my casual teachers were going on the picket line. And at my uni, most of the lecturers are casual and they're on like casual contracts, which means that they don't even know if they're working for the whole year. They are just working for that semester. and they don't even have that security. So they were going against that, and they were also going over some of the pay conditions and the work hours. And they had a picket line, so they were protesting outside outside our university. And the point of it is to try and stop entry from other people into the workplace. So for this case, it was stopping people from entering the uni. And we were told, don't come to uni, there's no class, complete day off. Which for us, we were like mad. But like low key, it's because like they're not happy with the conditions, and because big decisions are being made without their reflection or their consideration. That's an example of a picket line. Shout out to you, Sid. Anyways, work to rule is following official working rules and hours exactly in order to reduce output and efficiency, especially as a form of industrial action, while work bans is a form of industrial action where employees limit their working time to the hours specified in their contracts, refusing to work any overtime. So that's like a bus, like if their set hours are like 9 to 6 one day, 6 on the dot, they're like, okay, everybody off the bus. Oval machine off, we're not working anymore. Even though they could work overtime, its work ban is that industrial action where the employees limit that. But all of this together can lead to an increase in absenteeism. Um, and another way that they can kind of have an industrial dispute and kind of like go against it is by everyone planning to be sick on the same day, and it's kind of like, oh, nobody come in this day, like let's all call in sick. But it's another way to kind of like get a jab at your employer if you wanted to. This is a case study example. It's from 2017, but in this specific example, about 1,200 public bus drivers in Sydney's inner west striked for 24 hours from midnight because of the government's privatisation of services in the area. So it was specifically in Leichhardt in these suburbs. But the workers were concerned that all Sydney bus workers would lose their jobs to privatise bus companies like Forest or Transdev. And as a result, they striked for 24 hours. So the strike was the specific industrial dispute kind of like strategy or method that they were using. And it was all because of restructuring and change of management, which led to a fear of redundancy on that end. So they felt like they had to get that attention. And this is from an ABC article. So even something like a strike that like a business or that workers can pull off can reach the news. And then for a business or for an employer, that's their worst nightmare because they don't want that bad publicity. And they don't want everyone putting in their 2 cents, and they don't want to look like the bad guys, and not how you're going to look like a super, like especially with corporate social responsibility and like the ethical responsibility and care for workers, like that's not going to come across if like your workers are striking. So no business wants disputes, they just want peace realistically, but they also want control. So balancing it very hard, and that's why there are a lot of disputes in the workplace. Now, strategies to overcome workplace disputes include clear and effective grievance procedures, which are going to minimize the costs in the business. They really emphasize negotiation and mediation, but if necessary, it may lead to legal intervention through conciliation arbitration, which are in the courts or with Fair Work. But either way, they're legally, and you kind of lose that just lose that sense of negotiation and lose the ability to come to a decision yourselves. Someone else will make the decision for you. And it's kind of like a court case where it's like, yep, this is how it is. So the three processes of dispute resolution: there's negotiated outcome. This is where the parties work out solutions themselves. It's like, okay, well, let's get the problem and let's get the problem worker apparently, and then let's get the employer, and we're going to sit together and work this out ourselves, and we're going to negotiate between the two of us and try to come to an agreement. Now, if that doesn't work, you can go to a mediated outcome where you get an independent mediator, and they're going to assist with the development of agreement. The keyword here is assist. They're not going to tell you do this. They'll advise it. They'll encourage it. They're going to try and bring you guys together to agree, but there is no legally binding matter. All they can really do is assist and advise in a mediator, because they're just like mediating. They're kind of like the medium when they're not getting too involved, but they're still there, and you have to feel a bit respectful. Now, for a lot of businesses, they're going to like having a mediator because it is independent, so they'll feel a bit more free to speak their mind. But if that isn't working, you can go to conciliation and arbitration, and an adjudicated agreement, which is when an independent arbitrator or a court determines how matters will be resolved and makes a legally binding order. It's really important to recognize the difference between the mediated outcome and the arbitrated one, because the mediator is just assisting, the arbitrated agreement is determining how it's resolved, and they make a legally binding order. So, like, you know what? We've heard it. This is what's going to happen. This is what each party is going to do. While the mediated outcome is like, this is what I think each party should do, but you don't necessarily have to follow it. So, that's the difference between the two. But before taking protected industrial action, you have to prove that both parties have acted in good faith, so that they have met regularly with willingness to reach an agreement. Like, if you've got both parties and the employee and the employee are just really cut up and they've just got bad blood and it's not working and their end goal isn't to reach an agreement, there is no point taking it that far. Um, because, and having that protected industrial action, because clearly it's like just personal and it's not even to just reach an agreement. It's more for, it might be their own pride, their own ego, or their own goals rather than for the sake of the business. But it really just depends. So grievance procedures are formal procedures that are generally written into an award or into an agreement. So in most contracts, they will be within that. And it states the agreed processes to resolve disputes in the workplace. So it's like, okay, this is what's going to happen when we have a problem in the workplace. So it is useful in reducing the risk of an issue rapidly becoming a serious dispute. And most businesses do have like an established formal process, and it is now required in modern awards and contemporary ones and agreements. But effective grievance procedures require a full description of the complaint to be made by the employee with the complaint. So they put in the complaint about another worker, about the employer, about whatever's happening, and it's a full description of it. Um, but the person who the grievance is being made against should always be given the details of the allegation and the opportunity to present their views as well. Because again, in the workplace, not always, but sometimes, again, with rivalry and just with bad blood for each other, someone can make a complaint about you, but it's not necessarily true. So it is important that they give also details of the allegation, that they hear it. So if someone's saying like, oh, Sophia's so rude to me and said this about me, it's important that I am approached by my employer and I'm told, okay, blah, blah, said this about you. What do you have to say about this? Did this truly happen? What's your views on it? And from that, you can then try and solve the problems more quickly and professionally. The key goal is to try and solve it more quickly and professionally. You want it to be handled professionally because you don't want all this drama and to look really unprofessional, but you want it solved quickly because we don't have time for this. We've got a profit to make. We're on the run. Anyways, negotiation is discussion between the parties, and that's when it's literally just one on one. There's no mediator, there's no arbitrator, it's literally just one on one. It can benefit both parties because it increases the knowledge of company policy, business objectives, worker concerns, and issues, and then they can kind of find a middle ground, and it is the most common way to resolve disputes. So, a lot of the time, if there is an issue, go to your boss, talk it out, see what happens. But if that's not working, you know what? We're going to go to mediation, which is a confidential discussion of issues in a non threatening environment in the presence of a neutral, objective third party. Now, that third party can be an independent agreed on from the business that both parties have chosen or a representative has chosen, but also from a tribunal or a government agency such as the Anti-Discrimination Board. A lot of people, especially when the issue is bigger and sometimes when it starts to borderline and it kind of feels personal, they like getting a third party involved because let's just say you assume your boss hates you. Even if that's not true, if you believe that in your head, it's going to be very hard to negotiate with them because you're just going to take everything personally. While when there is a third party, because it's someone, especially if it's outside of the business and it's a tribunal or government agency, they're aware of the industry and of the general conditions, um, and the award or the agreement, but they're still an outsider, and I think that just adds that level of fairness to it. But it does allow both parties to become empowered because they are resolving their own dispute, but they feel like they're resolving it on their own, but really it's the mediator who's like kind of like guiding it. They're kind of like a TV host. And they're like telling like, okay, well, I think you should do this. What if you did this? And they're questioning it. That's going to reduce escalation and expensive legal costs because we don't want that, because if negotiation and mediation don't work, guess what? We're going to conciliation and arbitration. So disputes that have passed the nominal expiry date, bargaining's occurring, but it's just not working. And if it's not solved by negotiation and you're going to mediation and it's not working, you're going to call in conciliation, which is where third parties involved to help the other two parties reach an agreement, and that really overlaps with like a mediator, and like as a conciliator, like they really kind of have the same role. If that fails, we're going to arbitration, which is where third party hears both sides. So it's literally kind of just like a court hearing. They're like, okay, what's your side? What's your side? And they're like, you know what? This is what I think. Risky business, because the judgment is handed down based on the merits of the evidence that's legally binding, and that judgment is legally binding. So you lose any control. It is completely up to whatever this judge says, or whatever the arbitrator says. So, and on top of that, a lot of legal costs. You're going to court, you're getting the arbitrator involved, wasting time, wasting money. Not always wasting, because sometimes the issues are really great and really big issues, but in the business's eyes and as a management and as like HR management, it is going to look like wasting time because it's just not necessary. And it just could have been avoided through negotiation. And the most important thing is that the most common way to resolve disputes is by negotiation. A lot of the time it stops there. So that's pretty important to remember. That is the end of our slideshow, guys. I know, I don't know what's happening there. I know that was kind of like a quick go through, and I wish I could go through all of HR, but I really specifically wanted to focus on the dot points that are very often ignored. But I hope you got a lot from this lecture. Again, you can download the slides. Thank you so much for coming. It's recorded, so you can come back to this at any time and hear me talk for nearly 2 hours again. But we will also be having lectures in like late September, right before your HSC, and kind of like final like preparation ones. And for those ones, we're going to be going through the hardest dot points of every single topic, and it's going to be like a very general kind of like, let's get through as much of all the functions as we can. So if you enjoyed this one, maybe you will see me again potentially. But I hope you got a lot out of this, and thank you to everyone who's came in live to ask any questions on the live chat. I hope I could help you out there too. Have a good one, guys. All the best for your trials. My best advice now is just past papers. If you're not really bothered sitting a full past paper because it is hard, just sit the multiple choice one day, and the next day just write a business report. You don't have to sit the full paper 3 hours like 10 times. Like, great if you can and great if you want to, but with all your other subjects, it's really hard to balance that. And I know personally it just wasn't working for me. So when I wasn't feeling the most motivated, I'd just be like, you know what, I'm going to do 2 multiple choice sections of 2 past papers. And I was like, okay, that's my business study for today. But that's always something you can do. Thanks, guys.